dentists in many cities are helping to bring the benefits of fluoridation to children.
Look, Mom, no cavities.
Now, our children can have better health through fluoridated water.
Fluoride is safe.
The benefits of fluoridation will last throughout life. They can drink away tomorrow's tooth decay.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this action will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I will.
I do.
You are appearing today as a representative of the United States Environmental Protection Agency.
As a representative of the CDC.
Yes.
And CDC, as you sit here today, is not aware of any data in the published literature that would define the tolerable upper fluoride intake for neurotoxic effects on children, for children.
What's the science on this water fluoridation? Is it actually reducing teeth decays, or are there better ways, like through toothpaste? What's the efficacy of this intervention?
When we started in the United States with this fluoridation program, the belief and understanding by the public health community at that time is that we need to swallow fluoride as the teeth are developing, so during the first years of life, that fluoride will incorporate into the tooth and the tooth will be forever more resistant to tooth decay.
The earlier that fluoridated water is used, the greater the benefit. It is a protection that continues throughout life.
So it was a systemic benefit. You need to ingest it. That's why we added fluoride as well to pills that people would swallow. Water and pills. You swallow it, your teeth become stronger for life, and you have less tooth decay. That was the original premise on which this whole fluoridation paradigm was based. However, it's now a consensus, even in the dental research community, is that fluoride doesn't actually need to be swallowed. That the benefit, the predominant benefit, if not the exclusive benefit of fluoride, comes from its topical contact with the outside of the tooth. Topical, not systemic, okay? Even the Centers for Disease Control, which is an active proponent of water fluoridation here in the United States, the CDC concedes that.
Yes.
So CDC recognizes and accepts that fluoride's predominant mechanism for preventing tooth decay comes from fluoride's topical contact with the outside of the enamel, correct?
Predominantly, that's where the benefits are, yes.
Okay. So you, as a representative of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, agree that fluoride's primary benefit to teeth is topical.
Objection form.
Yes.
Okay. If you don't need to swallow this chemical, why are we still adding it to the water supply where everyone in this population is drinking it every day?
We have not found evidence that supports benefit, that shows benefit to the child if ingested, if community water fluoridation or some other form of fluoride is ingested by the mother.
What are the harms or potential harms from fluoride exposure through the water?
The primary concerns with fluoride exposure are its effects on the brain, particularly the developing brain, its effects on the thyroid gland, its effects on the bones, including its ability to weaken bone, cause bone fracture, as well as its ability to cause arthritis. And I think the question with fluoride is not so much, can fluoride affect the brain? Can fluoride affect the thyroid gland? Can fluoride affect the bones? So CDC agrees with NRC that it is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain and the body by direct and indirect means.
Yes, CDC in connection with the Intergovernmental Work Group.
So you would agree, Dr. Barone, that the NRC concluded that fluoride has the ability to interfere with the functions of the brain, correct?
Objection. Yes, I believe their findings are correct.
The evidence is clear that it can. The question is more about what are the doses that can cause these effects, and how do these doses vary based on individual factors like nutrition, like genetics, like kidney function. And one of my concerns is that when you're dealing with fluoride exposure, especially when you're distributing it en masse through the water supply, is you're exposing people who are much more vulnerable to suffering the harm. And I think if we are guided by the principle that we should protect the most vulnerable, then we really should be taking steps to use fluoride in a much more targeted fashion.
Got it. So let's do a deeper dive on those areas. You mentioned first the brain and the developing brain in particular. So how does fluoride affect a developing brain? What's the possible harm there?
So in the past 10 or so years, the National Institutes of Health have funded birth cohort studies to understand if fluoride during the in utero period and during infancy, if it's associated with reductions in IQ and other neurodevelopmental effects. And these studies, which were done in Mexico and Canada, have both found that yes, early life exposure to fluoride is associated with reductions in IQ. And what's remarkable and concerning about these studies is that the amount of IQ loss that they are seeing from fluoride exposure rivals the amount of IQ loss that was seen in the studies on lead.
Is there evidence that children are being harmed by fluoride now on a kind of mass basis?
Well, the recent national surveys in the United States show that up to 80% of kids, 80%, show signs of fluorosis on at least 2 of their teeth. Dental fluorosis is a condition of the tooth enamel that is caused by too much fluoride exposure as the teeth are forming. Infant exposures to fluoride are a major driver of dental fluorosis. A baby that's formula fed with fluoridated water receives over 100 times more fluoride than the breastfed baby.
Yeah, according to this, yes.
Do you think the recommendation to avoid the use of fluoridated water in infant formula is a reasonable and sound recommendation?
Well, it certainly appears to be reasonable given that the dose to infants is potentially greater than the reference dose for dental fluorosis, excuse me. And it provides no benefit at that stage.
So basically, fluoride is interfering with the tooth-forming cells, the ameloblasts, okay? And that is manifested in the form of staining of the enamel. And it takes the form of white specks and splotches that are parallel. So for it to be fluorosis, you would have a white splotch on your upper right front tooth and your upper left front tooth, parallel. When you see that, that's most likely dental fluorosis. But it can also affect other teeth. Some people have it in their molars. Mm-hmm. It all depends on when you were exposed. That's a visible sign of overexposure. So I do think we have a significant overexposure problem today.
So I believe you're involved in litigation. Tell us the story of your litigation related to fluoride.
Right. So I represent a number of environmental health groups and mothers who are concerned about fluoride exposure. And we brought a suit against the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, in 2017, so about 7 years ago. And we brought the case under a law called the Toxic Substances Control Act, or TSCA. And the allegation in the case is that fluoridation of the water presents an unreasonable risk to human health in the form of neurotoxicity, the effects on the brain. And I am happy to say that this is the first time that citizen groups have filed a petition under this law, TSCA, and managed to get all the way to a federal trial. And that's what we did in June of 2020. We had a 7-day trial, which featured extensive expert testimony from both sides. We were very fortunate to have some of the best scientists in the world who have looked at the fluoride issue, including Dr. Philippe Grandjean, whose work on mercury and IQ was the sort of impetus for government regulations to protect the public from mercury. We were also very fortunate to have Dr. Bruce Lanphier, who's done some of the seminal research on lead and IQ. And Dr. Lanphier talked about his research on fluoride and IQ. And we also actually introduced testimony from EPA's own scientists who made some important admissions in the case about fluoride's ability to affect the brain.
So you would agree that this is an important study here, a prospective birth cohort study, which is finding a significant relationship between low levels of fluoride in the urine of pregnant women and ADHD symptoms in children.
Yes.
And you would agree that this study further supports the need for a reassessment of current safety standards of fluoride in the United States.
Yes, it's one of several.
After the trial, the judge stated that he agreed that there was serious evidence that raised serious questions about whether fluoridation chemicals are safe. But the judge stated he wanted to wait to make a decision until the National Toxicology Program completed its review of this very issue. Okay?
And where is the National Toxicology Program? What is that?
The National Toxicology Program is part of the National Institutes of Health. The National Toxicology Program, which is the NTP, is they are the federal government experts on the toxicology of chemicals. That's what they do. They study chemicals. On that day, the NTP, through one of its directors, Dr. Mary Wolf, emailed the CDC, the FDA, and the NIDCR to let them know that the report was finished and that the NTP would be publishing it in May. Okay? In her email, Dr. Wolf stated, we are sharing this document for your awareness. At this time, the analysis and the conclusions are set. Okay? So they're not inviting further edits. They're saying, we're done, we've completed the report. And then Dr. Wolf notes, quote, we are working towards its release in mid-late May and will share the date when it's set.
What did the report say? What were the conclusions?
The reports say that the evidence consistently associates fluoride exposure with reduced IQ.
The NTP identified 72 studies that have looked at the effect of fluoride on IQ, which the NTP agreed is a large body of evidence. And in the words of the NTP, the vast majority of these 72 IQ studies found that higher fluoride exposure is associated with IQ deficits in children, just like the birth cohort studies in Canada and Mexico had found. So overall, the NTP agreed that fluoride exposure is consistently associated with reduced IQ and that it's unlikely that methodological deficiencies in the studies can explain away this finding.
Immediately after Dr. Wolf at the NTP sent that email, you see correspondence within CDC, within NIDCR, and between those two organizations, talking about coordinating with each other, working with each other on how to respond to the NTP. And also what you see is an email from one of the CDC staffers to the CDC attorney, Joanna Stetner, who then promptly sends the report to the DOJ attorneys who are working on the lawsuit. So immediately the DOJ attorneys have a copy of this report. Now, word starts to get out to the private fluoridation dental lobby, On May 2nd, you have an email talking about, quote, potentially very bad fluoride news, unquote, coming out from the NTP. So word was getting out. There was a meeting on May 4th of the dental lobby. They have a meeting which is organized under this association called the Association for State and Territorial Dental Directors, ASTDD, which receives most of its funding from the CDC. Okay, CDC funds ASTDD to, in part, promote water fluoridation. They actually have a goal to increase the number of people in the country who are receiving fluoridated water. So you have this CDC-funded private organization that sets up a meeting on May 4th, of which consultants to the ADA attend. And at that meeting, a CDC official by the name of Tracy Bamer, who is the fluoridation engineer for the CDC, tells them, quote, CDC is in the process of proactively and preemptively taking steps to intervene in the NTP publication.
Wow.
Okay? Proactively and preemptively taking steps to intervene. Note, by the way, that the CDC is having these discussions with
lobbyists.
Yeah.
Lobbyists.
The same day as that meeting on May 4th, the CDC sent suggested edits to the conclusion for the NTP report. Okay?
What did they say?
They wanted the NTP to emphasize that this report does not concern water fluoridation. There's no real basis for concern about water fluoridation. And that's been a constant refrain from NIDCR and CDC and the Office of the Director for
And
NIH.
that completely went against the NTP report, correct?
Well, the NTP report is principally focused on, is fluoride a neurotoxicant?
Right.
Can it affect the brain? It
Right.
wasn't as concerned about the level of exposure that causes the effect, although in response to these criticisms from CDC and NIDCR, that there is no basis for concern at the levels we fluoridate water in the United States. The NTP pushed back on that. And they said, actually, the data does provide a basis for concern. You can't say that fluoridation is safe, which was a source of real contention.
Right.
Because the major focus of the CDC and the NIDCR is protecting their favorite policy. On May 9th, 2022, the NTP responds to the CDC and again reiterates that the NTP considers the report to be final. To quote, we believe that the current findings, as stated in the pre-publication draft monograph on fluoride, accurately reflect the scope of our evaluation and the available scientific literature, and no revision is needed.
So NTP was pushing back.
They were pushing back. Again, they said, we've considered all this input from many different stakeholders, and we have determined that the report is final and it accurately reflects the scientific literature. Okay? Then 2 days later, on May 11th, 2022, NTP sends another email to the CDC and the NIDCR telling them the report is coming out next week, May 18th, okay? And that email was sent at 11:12 a.m.
Right.
There is a whole flurry of emails for the remainder of that day and into the next few days by the CDC and the NIDCR and the Assistant Secretary of Health and the Office of the Director at NIH. All of them talking about, oh my, what are we gonna do? Like, they were freaked out, okay? 2 minutes after the email that the NTP sent on May 11th, a director at CDC, Karen Hacker, forwards the announcement and says, we need to get on this ASAP. Please move this forward immediately. So CDC is concerned, okay? And within 5 hours on that day, May 11th, NTP's director, Richard Wojcik, emails his colleagues at the NTP with the disappointing news that, quote, just received word that Admiral Levine wants an official HHS review and clearance of the report before it goes out. So that's within 6 hours of the announcement that the NTP is going to publish this report next week. Nope, the Assistant Secretary of Health wants to review it. So things are on hold, okay? Later that night, May 11th at 10:05 p.m., Tara Schwetz in the office of the director for NIH, she's the acting principal deputy director, she emails Lawrence Tabek. And in her email, she says, there is no way this is going out on May 18th. We're meeting tomorrow and we'll discuss more. Before it goes out, we will need to clear it and brief the Assistant Secretary of Health. So the Office of the Director is saying, yeah, there's no way we're going to allow this report.
We're not going to let this go.
Yeah. The next morning, the director of CDC's Division of Oral Health, Casey Hannon, attends a meeting with NTP, the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Health, and the Office of Director of NIH. And he emails others at CDC with his takeaways from the meeting. This is, okay. And he writes, the May 18th release date for the NTP report is almost certainly not going to happen. The Assistant Secretary of Health Office and NIH Office of Director are pretty clearly going to get more involved, okay? Which is what the NIDCR and CDC had been wanting, right? They wanted to get the higher level authorities at HHS involved to quash this thing, okay? So they were getting traction. They could see that their work was paying off, right? That same day, May 12th, the CDC has another meeting with the private dental lobbyists. Okay? Greg Holder, the CDC policy analyst, at this meeting, he starts talking to them about the NTP report and what's going on. But he asks that this discussion be, quote, off the record.
Do you know why the CDC provide the information, quote, off the record?
No, I do not.
So what he had to say to them on that day was, quote, off the record. So we don't have minutes of what he said or notes of what he said, okay? The next day, Greg Holder at the CDC speaks with Judy Feinstein and Chris Wood, who are the leadership of this group that I talked about earlier, ASTDD. This is the group funded by CDC to promote fluoridation, okay? Greg Holder has a phone call with them, and he tells them, quote, CDC officials, Assistant Secretary for Health Rachel Levine, and others have looked at the NTP report and are pushing back hard at NTP. So Greg Holder's words are, we are, quote, pushing back hard at NTP. Holder also notes in that meeting that the NTP is, quote, really digging in and standing by their report. God forbid. The NTP is standing by its report. Fast forward to June 3rd, and you have emails from the CDC that confirm that the Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, made a decision to put the report on hold. As one email says, quote, the latest we heard yesterday is that Assistant Secretary of Health Levine has put the report on hold until further notice.
Now, Rachel Levine is the one who ultimately made the decision to put the NTP monograph on hold, right?
Objection, Lance Foundation.
I don't know that personally. I would imagine, I mean, because of her position, she may have the ultimate authority to do that.
But you were specifically told by the CDC that Rachel Levine made the decision, right?
I have been told that Rachel Levine made that decision.
Right, and you were told that by CDC leadership, right?
Objection made.
It could have been the CDC.
So they succeeded, the obstructionists, if you will, succeeded in quashing the report.
Absolutely. So I think the emails make it pretty clear what happened.
Right.
That the conclusions, the scientific conclusions of the NTP were not sufficiently compatible with the policy interests of water fluoridation.
Right.
and that the NIDCR and the CDC, which are principally concerned with promoting this policy, found that unacceptable. They went up the ladder to the Assistant Secretary of Health and convinced the Assistant Secretary to order the NTP to not release the report. That's what happened.
So how did the NTP scientists and directors, how did they respond to this pressure? Do we know?
We know some of it. And the scientific director at the NTP, a scientist by the name of Brian Berridge, did make clear his concerns and misgivings about the political pressure that was being exerted on the NTP. On the morning of May 12th, shortly after being told by Tara Schwetz at the NIH Office of Director that the report is probably not going to be released next week, Brian Berridge responded, "I have significant concerns that the level of engagement on this scientific product has crossed the line from rigorous peer review to ensure balance and accuracy to one that could be construed as attempting to influence the outcomes." Dr. Berridge writes, "After 17 years in industry," because Dr. Berridge, prior to working at the NTP, had worked for, I think, certain pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Berridge writes, "After 17 years in industry, I've seen efforts to modify messages to fit commercial interests. I wasn't party to that there, and I'm not game to do that here." So he was flagging, like, I have concerns about the integrity of this process. As part of our lawsuit, we received a declaration from Dr. Linda Birnbaum. And Dr. Birnbaum was the director of the NTP from 2009 to 2019. Dr. Birnbaum expressed serious concerns about the political pressures that are being exerted. And I'll read you a quote from her declaration. Dr. Birnbaum wrote, "As someone who believes deeply in NTP's science-based mission, I am concerned by the recent course of events with the fluoride monograph. The decision to set aside the results of an external peer review process based on concerns expressed by agencies with strong policy interest on fluoride suggests the presence of political interference in what should be a strictly scientific endeavor." So that's the assessment of the former NTP director.
Is there any precedent for this in history?
Well, some people have asked me, was I surprised by what happened? And my response is, I wish I was surprised, but I wasn't. Because this is actually a long-standing pattern that we have seen on the fluoride issue at the federal level, where concerns about fluoride exposures and the potential for adverse effects have long been airbrushed away. And we have been provided by our federal health authorities with a very skewed, distorted, and often incorrect sort of assessment of the science. And this goes back to the very beginning.
So let's go back to the very beginning. How does this get started?
So I'll give you one very significant example of data suppression at the very beginning of the fluoridation policy that had very material consequences on safety standards, on fluoride in this country, as well as on fluoridation. Okay? In the early 1940s, public health service scientists were considering this question of whether to add fluoride to drinking water. They were considering it for reasons that we could explain, but one of the reasons was that there had been some studies done in the 1930s that had associated naturally occurring fluoride in the water with reduced tooth decay. So the question at hand was, well, should we go ahead and add fluoride to communities that don't have it in their water? So there was a conference in 1942 which was attended by, among others, H. Trenley Dean. Now, Trenley Dean is called the father of fluoridation. He had been the one who did the studies in the 1930s, looking at naturally occurring fluoride, and he ultimately promoted water fluoridation in the years ahead. But in 1942, Dr. Dean was expressing caution and concern about the potential for adverse health effects from adding fluoride to drinking water. And what he said is, before we do any experiments on fluoridation, before we add this to community water to see if we can replicate the purported benefit, we need to do some studies on potential health effects. And what he talked about doing is, let's go to areas in this country, like in Texas, where there's some pockets of where people have high levels of fluoride in the water, up to 8 parts per million, which is 8 times more than was proposed to be added to water. Dr. Dean said, let's go to those communities and do some studies to see if we can see any toxic effects. Okay? Well, they did that. In 1943, scientists at the Public Health Service went down to Bartlett, Texas, and did a study to look at whether people in that community were suffering effects from fluoride. And they found toxic effects from fluoride exposure. They found bone disease, including the calcification of the ligaments, the bony spurs, and these effects on the joints that are known to cause arthritic symptoms and pains. It's an adverse effect. It was a condition that had been diagnosed in the 1930s by a scientist named Carl Roholm, where he looked at industrial workers who were exposed to fluorine, and he found that it really had a serious effect on the joints and the bones. So Dr. Dean and his team, when they went to Texas, they looked at the bones, and sure enough, they saw the same types of changes in the bone structure and the joints that were seen in these industrial workers. They also, in addition to the bone changes, they were seeing effects on the eyes, actually cataracts. They found a very elevated rate of cataracts in the high fluoride community in Texas. They didn't believe it at first, so they went ahead and they did other studies in South Dakota and Iowa, which also had high levels of fluoride in the water. And sure enough, they found bone changes, bone disease, and they found the cataracts, okay? So they do this study in Texas, and they're doing these studies in South Dakota and Iowa. Do they publish the study? Do they tell the public? Do they tell the scientific community about their findings? No. The Public Health Service never published that study. They never reported those findings to anyone in the public or the broader scientific community.
Wow.
And you have this remarkable moment in April of 1944. You have this committee that's looking at whether to do a fluoridation experiment in Newburgh, New York, close to where we are here today. It would be the first ever experiment where they add fluoride to water to see, 1, if it reduces tooth decay, and 2, if it has adverse health effects, okay? At this committee, Dr. Dean is there. And Dr. Dean discloses to this committee his findings from Texas.
And what does he disclose?
He discloses that they found these bone changes, and they found a high level of cataracts. He also talks about how they were finding the high level of cataracts in other communities they were looking at as well, okay?
Okay.
And he tells the committee that, and they ask Dr. Dean, do you have any concerns, based on your findings, of whether adding fluoride to water in Newburgh could present adverse effects? And Dr. Dean's answer was, yes, I do have concerns. Based on what we're finding, I have concerns that fluoridating water could be toxic, okay? That was never disclosed to anybody in Newburgh, New York, or anyone from the public for that matter. The father of fluoridation, no one knew that he was expressing privately a concern that this policy could be toxic and cause harm, right? That was airbrushed away, okay? Just as the findings from that study from 1943 were airbrushed away, right? Also notable at that meeting, okay, 1944, people at the committee were saying, hey, we're interested in this data. Can we get a copy of this study? We want to look at it. And the chair of the committee, Harold Hodge, said, this data is confidential. Dr. Dean gave us the courtesy of providing this information from the Public Health Service files, but it is not to be shared with anyone outside this committee. So it was clear that the Public Health Service approached this data not as something that to inform the public with, but something that was potentially detrimental to their promotion of water fluoridation and not to be shared with anyone. And they adhered to that. That was not shared with anybody, okay? And that was at the very beginning of this policy. They just suppressed that data, and the public was not able to consider it.
Isn't there a military connection with the Public Health Service?
There was, certainly at that time especially, okay? So in this time, in the 1943, 1944 time frame, it's important to remember that we're in war, it's World War II, and we had the Manhattan Project going on. The Manhattan Project was this massive, sprawling, secret industrial enterprise to build the first atomic bomb to help win the war. And that project involved and required a very large amount of fluoride chemicals. It required a lot of uranium and a lot of fluoride to build the bomb. You couldn't have the bomb without uranium and fluoride back in the 1940s.
So we've all heard about uranium, but I don't think we've heard about fluoride being used in the manufacture of atomic weapons.
Right, I mean, the fluoride piece to the atomic bomb has largely been ignored and forgotten. But when you look at the bomb program documents, you will see that the bomb program scientists, the toxicologists, the chief medical director were very concerned about the effects of fluoride on human health. And they started studying the effects of fluoride on human health. So I mentioned earlier that the chair of the Newburgh Committee to fluoridate Newburgh, New York, was Harold Hodge. Harold Hodge was a scientist at the University of Rochester, but he also had another role. He was the chief toxicologist for the Manhattan Project. He went on to be the most important promoter of the safety of water fluoridation, Dr. Harold Hodge, without question. He was the go-to guy for decades to defend and articulate why fluoridation was safe.
Fluoride is safe, and I think I can say in conclusion that there is no health hazard that justifies postponing water fluoridation.
Harold Hodge, as we now know, was very involved with experiments on humans. Because to understand...
Uninformed consent experiments, right?
Absolutely. So to understand how the bomb chemicals would affect human health, Dr. Hodge and others set up a series of experiments where they exposed unknowing hospital patients who were called human products in the documents.
Oh, God, that's awful.
They would expose human products, okay? And they were doing that secretly without the consent of the human products. And then secretly studying these people to understand how uranium, plutonium...
So this is just like Tuskegee. There's no difference, is there?
Yeah,
they're watching the progression of disease, not telling people that they're being subjected to things that can cause them severe harm, if not death.
Right, and in the 1990s, under the Clinton administration, there was a committee formed which was specifically charged with understanding what happened with those human radiation experiments. These are situations where patients would come to the University of Rochester. They might have cancer, they might have been in a car accident, and they had the simple misfortune of getting into Harold Hodge's ward. And then they would proceed to be injected with plutonium or uranium to see if it would cause kidney damage or other harm, or to see how the body would metabolize plutonium or uranium, right? Harold Hodge was involved there in Rochester. He was also involved in coordinating uranium experiments in Massachusetts in the 1950s. That is all well known now. But what is not well known is Harold Hodge's work experimenting on human beings with fluoride. And what is very troubling is when you start to look at the internal, previously classified files from Harold Hodge, he was saying things to the public that directly contradicted what he had found internally.
So he knew he was lying.
Yes, and I'll give you an example. I'll let people make up their own minds, okay? So in the 1940s, as part of his work for the bomb program, Harold Hodge exposed humans with kidney disease to fluoride. And he wanted to see if people with kidney disease had any difficulty excreting the fluoride. Because if you can't excrete it out of your body, you start building up toxic levels and can be harmed. he reported in the internal files for the bomb program that the people with kidney disease, some of them couldn't excrete any of the fluoride. They accumulated 100% of it, which is a serious matter. So Dr. Hodge does that, and he also does, in the 1940s, a study on rabbits, where he creates kidney disease in the rabbits, and then he exposes them to fluoride, and of course he finds that the rabbits with kidney disease don't excrete fluoride very well. That's what Harold Hodge found internally. In 1950s, when concerns are being raised by people in Congress and the public about, well, are people with kidney disease at potential risk here from adding this chemical to the water? Harold Hodge wrote in the Journal of the American Dental Association, okay? He wrote that his studies showed that even in severe cases of kidney disease, there is no increased rate of accumulation of fluoride in their body, even in severe cases. And yet internally, he had found out that up to 100% of it was staying in the body. He never disclosed that to the public. No one at the bomb program or the Manhattan Project or the Atomic Energy Commission ever disclosed that to the public. Instead, Harold Hodge says in the Journal of the American Dental Association, there's no reason for concern for kidney patients because they don't have any impairment in their ability to excrete fluoride.
I'm sure the physician on this committee will agree that these people are just as healthy as people who drink ordinary water.
That's exactly right. A great deal of sound medical evidence suggests that these chemical compounds will not harm the human system in any way when used in the recommended proportions, and further, will save teeth, and therefore making it easier for us doctors to preserve the health of the people of Hill and Dale.
I like this fluoridation idea.
The Atomic Energy Commission had a policy for when scientists working for the bomb program could publish or disclose the results of their findings, okay? And in this policy from 1947, the AEC, Atomic Energy Commission, stated that when the data indicates hazards from process chemicals used to make the bomb, of which fluoride was one, uranium was another, right? That data would be very prejudicial to the interest of the government. And because it would increase the number of claims against the government, it would be bad for public relations, and it would be bad for labor relations. So any such data needed to be cleared by the insurance branch at the Atomic Energy Commission. So why is that significant? It's significant because it shows that the research being done by government scientists back then, that there was an express policy that if the data indicated harm, not benefits, harm from fluoride or from any other process chemical, that was detrimental to the government interests, right? And would need to receive approval before being published. So you have a mechanism, an express mechanism, which basically corrupted what was being told to the public, because if it was adverse, if it was detrimental to fluoride, that would be considered detrimental to the government's interest. So it was a climate that was not conducive to open and transparent communication of the actual science. So this is, in my view, highly significant to any understanding of this early science on fluoride. And there's other examples that we can talk about, but what you will see when you start looking back at these documents and these files is that the foundation, the early foundation upon which our fluoride safety standards are based and which so much of our public understanding of fluoride is based, it was corrupted.
You are looking at protection that is being denied to 40 million American children. Why? Why is this safe, simple, proven protection against tooth decay not available to everybody?
I sometimes read this going back to those days, and I just look at the official history of fluoride and the introduction of water fluoridation, and I look at it as so superficial, as just failing to grapple with the with what we can see in these internal documents, failing to grapple with the nature of the data suppression that went on back then. I mean, even Frank McClure, the PHS, the public health service scientist who got permission from the War Department to publish on fluoride in the 1940s and went on to promote fluoridation, even Frank McClure, he published a book in 1970 about water fluoridation. And in that book, he talked about the, quote, touchy and unyielding, unquote, issues of data suppression at the federal level were bound to raise questions, about the policy. He recognized that data suppression was a problem at the federal level for fluoride.
Mom! Look, Mom! No cavities! Isn't that wonderful? The dentist says not one new cavity. Pretty smart of you, Mom, switching us to Crest toothpaste.
Yes, Crest is the toothpaste that works, because Crest is the toothpaste with Fluoristan, a special fluoride formula. Fluoride, you know, is the decay fighter dentists use. The decay fighter the dentist put right on the teeth, just as you see it here. Now, with Crest, you can put this same fluoride on your teeth at home, too.
I remember as a child watching, 4 out of 5 dentists or 9 out of 10 dentists support fluoride in your toothpaste. I mean, there was a lot of promotional effort. I think what most people think of when they think of fluoride is it's good for your teeth.
Absolutely, and I think this highlights one of the major consequences and problems of the federal government, the federal health authorities, not being open and not being honest with the public about what they were finding on fluoride toxicity, because it permitted this sort of cultural environment to remain where people just thought of fluoride as calcium, as some really healthy new thing that's going to prevent tooth decay. Because by not presenting the bad side, the bad facts, this caricature notion of fluoride was sort of brought into existence. And it's never gone away. I mean, it's still so many people, when they think of fluoride, they think of shining white teeth, white-coated dentists, and like American apple pie. Like, it's just considered such a essential part of our living today in the modern world.
What does it cost? No more than the cost of an ice cream cone. An average cost of about 1 dime a year can ensure up to 65% less tooth decay in children.
Data suppression has a real effect on public understanding. It has a real effect on the scientific understanding.
Well, I would call this censorship, and one of the core values of this country historically is the First Amendment. That's certainly something that Children's Health Defense has been working on a lot, is to push back against government censorship around other health issues. And obviously, when you censor health information, as has been the case here with fluoride, you're putting people's lives at risk. It's different to censor health information than to censor political information. They both can be deadly, but censoring health information and censoring information that gets to doctors and to scientists, clearly that's going to impact some people's health and potentially lead to death. So is there any justification for keeping the fluoride in the water today? Why are we doing it today?
Well, I think the first part of the question, I don't think there's a need to continue fluoridating because of what we know about how fluoride, any benefit that fluoride provides can be obtained topically, so you can put it on your teeth and spit it out. There's no compelling reason to be adding it to the water when we're going to swallow that. Your brain doesn't need fluoride. Your thyroid gland doesn't need fluoride. Your bones don't need fluoride. The only part of your body that may benefit from fluoride are your teeth. And you can get the fluoride to your teeth through a very simple, elegant mechanism. You put it on toothpaste, you brush it on, and you spit it out. So I don't think we need to be fluoridating the water anymore. And there's many good reasons to not, because of the concerns that we have on the health effects. Right. And Europe shows us that you can remove fluoride from your water and have perfectly good teeth.
The vast majority of Europe does not add fluoride to its water supplies, correct?
Objection. As much as I know, yes, it is correct.
Now, have you, in the course of your research on fluoride, looked at any data with respect to the dental caries rates in Europe?
Yeah, I've looked at the graphic representation of the World Health Organization's charting of dental caries rates, comparing many European countries and the United States.
What does that data show specifically with respect to Europe?
That there is a general decline in dental caries rates throughout Europe.
And how does the decline in caries in Europe compare with the decline in caries that we have seen here in the United States?
Pretty much on a parallel track.
And what significance, if any, do you draw from that fact?
That you don't need to put fluoride in the drinking water in order to have a decrease in dental caries rates.
Dr. Hersey, based on everything you have learned and researched, do you have an understanding as to what percentage of the population in Europe consumes fluoridated drinking water?
It's very low. It's probably around 2%.
But as to your question as to why, I struggle with that question. I don't have a great answer to that question. I do think that the data suppression, the censorship, the distortion of data that occurred in those early years in the 40s and the 50s created a corrupt foundation that really shaped public attitudes, both in the public and in the scientific community and the public health community, about fluoride being generally benign, perfectly safe and fine. And I think that has cast a long shadow over these past 70 to 80 years. So that had a real effect.
Has the mainstream media been covering this trial and this issue at all? Do people know about this? It seems like it affects almost everybody in the country. I'm curious what the role of the media has been on this issue of water fluoridation.
Well, there has been media coverage and some decent coverage of the litigation, as well as some of the issues going on with the NTP. However, not at the sort of major media level like New York Times or cable TV. It's largely just been ignored, and that's consistent with a long-standing pattern that we've seen with major corporate media, where they either ignore the issue entirely, or when they cover it in this caricature way that is so far removed from an intelligent discussion of the issues, so far removed from the real questions that are prompted by any sort of intelligent assessment of the science. And they treat this like it's, on one hand, you have all of science, and scientists saying fluoridation is amazing, it's so effective, it's so safe. How could anyone in the world ever question this, right? And on the other hand, it's like, oh, and then you have a bunch of crackpots who wear the tinfoil hats on their head, and those people, right? The kooks and the cranks and the conspiracy theorists. So that's the way the media presents this issue. And I would say that is such a disservice. It's a disservice to the public. It's a disservice to the trade of journalism. And it's frankly sad to see. And, I think we both know.
I get it. I'm kind of familiar with that media paradigm, yeah.
And, here's just an example. Okay, just one little tidbit of an example. The New York Times published something, it was maybe 10 years or so ago, and they said, the science on fluoridation has been settled since the 1950s. There's no point in basically covering this anymore. It's settled. The science is settled. It's done. No more need to even engage in some of these questions. And I just thought about how anti-scientific that sentiment is. And I think it speaks to this broader sort of almost weaponization of science, where we are told to trust the science. Trademark, trust the science, right? And I think it's interesting. What does that mean? What does it mean to trust the science? And I think ultimately what it means is trust these institutions that are the mediators of the science. Trust them, because they will tell you the truth. And I think that that sort of creates this attitude, this kind of deferential sort of, okay, don't think for yourself, just listen to these institutions, that I think is a bit troubling.
People sometimes call this scientism rather than science, and it's really trusting in dogma and kind of the new priest class, right? And President Eisenhower warned of this when he was leaving the presidency, about the scientific technological elite that could really take control. And it's a theme that runs through a lot of these issues.
And CDC, as you sit here today, is not aware of any data in the published literature that would define the tolerable upper fluoride intake for neurotoxic effects on children, for children.
As a rep of CDC, to my knowledge, we don't have any knowledge about that.
Fluoridation is endorsed by the American Dental Association, State and Territorial Dental Health Directors, American Association of Public Health Dentists, Public Health Service, Federal Security Agency, State and Territorial Health Officers, American Public Health Association, and the American Medical Association.
Was that powerful or what? That was unbelievable. I'm Don Huffines, and hello, Patriots. Hello, Patriots. Well, let's save the applause. I'm going to introduce right here the man that's responsible for the incredible interview. I mean, what incredible detail. It's such knowledge on this important issue. And Michael Connett, come on down. Come on down here. He's right here in person. Have a seat, Michael. As y'all probably know, Michael's a very well-respected attorney. He grew up in upstate New York, and way upstate New York, I think, yeah. And he lives in New Hampshire, and he came all the way down here for this event. And he knows Regina very well, and Serena, and he's helped out Regina over the years to combat Dallas City Council pouring $1 million worth of fluoride in our water every year. It's amazing. Well, Michael's got a very well-respected law firm now, and it's a little different than what was on the video. I think you're in a different firm. They have about eight offices around the country, and he's certainly familiar with FOIA requests. I imagine you've done hundreds of those and all the other issues, as you could see from the video. But for me, I'm Don Huffines, and this has been an issue for me for a couple of decades, and I've been barking about it for a long time. I was in the Texas Senate from 14 to 18, and I brought the issue up down there to my colleagues, Republican colleagues, and they really thought I was crazy and the bill wouldn't go anywhere, so I didn't even file it. But we did work with the Republican convention over the years at the state party convention to get it on the platform. I just find it amazing that people, even if you didn't think fluoride was a problem, the fact that the government is sticking it in your water and medicating you unbeknownst to you is just bizarre. I just find that just absolutely bizarre. And I tell everybody this, and I've told everybody this over the years, you don't just have the authority to question government. You have an obligation to question government. That's the job of you as a patriot, as a citizen of the United States. And what this is all about, this is really all about catching them at a 70-year-old lie. A 70-year-old lie, of lying to everyone, because they know if you can convince, if they have to go and admit that they were deceitful, intentional deceitful, and have caused incredible harm to thousands of Americans, if not millions of Americans, imagine what else they're going to have to admit. I mean, really. I mean, I thought one thing that the Wuhan virus really showed us was who in the world would believe WHO or any other health organizations? And now, what about our foreign policy? It goes so deep. It's much deeper than we realize how much the governments have lied to us about almost everything in our life. And whether it's the foreign policy, how much do we hate this country or that country, how much money's being made, whether it's the seed oils, Crisco and flaxseed oil and everything else we've been subjected to by big businesses teaming up with the government. But anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox here. And let's talk to the man that knows it all. And we're here for Q&A, and he's going to give an opening statement of whatever he wants to say. And he's going to answer your questions, and I'll moderate it if that's possible. Well, Michael, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And, you know, as I told Regina, you can't say no to Regina. Her enthusiasm is infectious. She called me. I haven't done many of these events, but when Regina presented to me, I said, I can't say no to Regina. So I'll start here, and I really want to answer people's questions tonight. But I'll start here with this notion of informed consent, okay? Because that's ultimately, and I think you'll see obviously the overlap between some of the vaccine-related issues and fluoride on this front. Informed consent is the right that all of us have. Fundamentally, all of us have the right to informed consent when it comes to medical treatment. Informed consent has two components to it. It has the consent component. You have the right to choose what medicines you're going to take. That's your right. No one else's right. It's your right. But there's also the informed component. You have a right to receive the information about the medicine, not just the benefits, but the potential risks. And this documentary here is really focusing on how the information that would permit us to make informed decisions about if and how we want to use fluoride was taken away from us. It was taken away from us. Because ultimately, even people who have had the opportunity to vote on whether they want to add fluoride chemicals to their drinking water, which happens in referendum across the country, even people who have had that right ultimately have not truly had the right to informed consent. Because we've never really been given, we've never been respected enough by government authorities to consider the full range of available information on this issue. We're not respected enough to be given that information. Instead, we're giving prepackaged propaganda, basically, right? That's what they think we can handle. But don't get into the more complex or more challenging, more troubling facts of the fluoride issue. And I'm going to, one more point I'd like to make, and then I'd really like to answer some questions. Going to this issue of informed consent. You saw here in this film Harold Hodge, who was this Manhattan Project scientist, one of the major proponents of water fluoridation for decades in this country. Very significant figure.
Harold Hodge, as you saw, he found in his government studies in the 1940s on behalf of the Atomic Energy Commission, he found that people with kidney disease can't excrete fluoride very well, so they build it up in their body. You saw that, right? But I want to tell you one of the consequences of that information not being shared with the public. One of the consequences. It's a little known fact about the history of water fluoridation. That is, some of you in the audience may know people who are on dialysis. Well, because this information is not shared with the public, dialysis centers did not filter fluoride out of the dialysis in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And then guess what? Scientists started to see that there was this painful, crippling bone disease that dialysis patients were suffering. And they were trying to figure out what was the cause. And they did study after study, and then they found in the 1970s that fluoridated water in the dialysis is causing a crippling bone disease. And that is why dialysis centers now filter fluoride out of the dialysis. But it took 3 decades. 3 decades for that to happen. So how many dialysis patients were being poisoned with this in dialysis? And what does it come down to? Informed consent. They did not share that information. And so dialysis centers had no reason to think that this is something you should filter out of the dialysis. And so that just goes again to the importance of transparency. Allow the public to know what you know. Okay? If you're the government and you're studying this, allow us to know what you know. Don't hide it from us, because if you hide it from us, you deprive us of our right to informed consent.
We got quite a few hands up. I guess my job is to call. You can call on people too. But that fella right there with the glasses, he had his hand up first. Or wait, yep, go ahead. Got a hard hat on. He's ready.
I'm from the water utilities, so I know what goes in the water, the fluoridated. But my question is, with dialysis, have fatalities occurred from dialysis before fluoride was removed?
There have been poisonings in dialysis centers, notably in 1993 in Chicago. There was, and then also in Annapolis, Maryland, 2 incidents where dialysis patients were killed, died, because the dialysis did not filter out the fluoride, and then there was an accident leading to higher fluoride levels, and the dialysis patient died. And thankfully, it hasn't been a common experience, but it's the most extreme form of toxicity for dialysis patients. The bone disease was a more chronic and more common effect.
Thank you.
Yeah. Back row, back up there, the back row. Yes.
Hello, great movie, concise and great explanations. My question is if to remove fluoride or any other chemicals within the water, is that a state issue, a local issue, county, city? Who would a constituent need to speak to get it removed?
It's a great question. It varies in every state. So unfortunately, there are maybe 20 or so states that have statewide mandates, meaning you do not have the right to make any decision with respect to fluoridation in your community. It's all at the state level. California, Illinois, a number of states have that, okay? But most states, it is a local decision at the city or county level. And that's one of the great things about this fluoride issue, because it's one of those issues where we citizens can have an impact. It's harder in the city, as Regina knows, it's harder in big cities because you have more gatekeepers, it's harder, okay? But we see across this country hundreds upon hundreds of communities that have successfully organized
to keep fluoride out of the water or to take it out. So it is one of those things where there is an ability for local communities to affect change.
I would tell everybody in DFW that each city's different. Highland Park, University Park, no fluoride. Other cities, no fluoride. Some have different amounts. Some have more than others. So you really need to pay attention to your water department to find out how much they're putting into your water. Some of it's naturally occurring, of course, so it could be if they have well water, you're going to have a little bit of fluoride in there anyway. But it's how much they're spending and how much they're putting in to potentially poison you. Let's see, this lady right here has a question in red. Yes, ma'am. Need a mic. Here's coming right behind you.
I have a very special request. I have a book signed by your dad. I would like your signature.
I'd be happy to. Thank you.
Nice. That's sweet. Right. I guess people really rolling a lot of questions here. This is fantastic. What an engaged audience. Okay, this lady right over here on the aisle. I'm going to do a lottery. Maybe make some money out of this.
This one right here?
Yes, sir.
Incredible movie, incredibly informative. Thank you so much. I'm in the medical field, and this is horrifying and sickening, and we've seen this with COVID. Question for you. The fundamental issue is this lack of independence on these institutions like the TDC. You showed that graph. How do we fundamentally attack this problem where the government is using national security or some kind of other excuse for secrecy all along the way with COVID and with this? How do we attack this as a people to be able to create no conflict of interest and oversight?
It's a good question, and it's obviously a challenging one. First off, thank God for the Freedom of Information Act. One of the most powerful tools for citizens to understand what their government is doing, and thank God we have it. Because that's the first most critical step. They should not have the right to operate in secret. Amen. Because when they operate in secret, bad things happen, right? So the most important thing is we need the disinfectant of sunlight over these agencies. They don't get to just play with their partners, their private partners, okay? Just like you saw in this film. Who is the CDC talking with during this? They're not talking to us. They're not talking to people in the public. They're talking to their lobbyist friends, right? So the most critical thing is transparency and finding as many possible ways, and to go beyond FOIA, and I haven't thought this through, but we need radical transparency. Radical transparency. That would be the first thing I would say, and maybe I'll keep my answer to that, and that's going to help understand who are the players. And so we need that. We need transparency.
That's right.
Okay, you're on the left, right? Yes, sir. Right there.
Okay, why is the government always trying to kill us?
Can you repeat the question? Repeat the question.
The question is, why is the government always trying to kill us? I don't know.
So I understand the frustration that people have when you look across multiple issues and you see a failure by government agencies to be upfront and honest, right? That always creates suspicion, right? Mm-hmm. So people say, well, people are they're not trusting these. There are people who are concerned by the fact that the public does not trust these institutions. My response to that is the way you deal with that is make these institutions that we can trust. Amen. It's their fault that people don't trust them anymore. Don't blame people for not trusting them when they have lied to us and they failed to be honest with us. So I'll answer your question that way. I understand why people are frustrated with these agencies, and the way the way to deal with that is be honest. Be honest.
I would just add a little bit. It might be a little, I'm not saying it is or isn't, but there is a possibility it's a little more nefarious than just that. This could be There's groups of people in the world today that think humans are parasites to their God, which is the earth, and that we don't really have. They just don't have the compassion or anything for human life that normal people would have. And this is not recent. This is not just with the Democrat Party recently. This has been going on for decades. So I hope it's not nefarious like that, but there's a lot of that unfortunately is probably true.
We've got a question.
You got a question up there. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So how many times is it going to take us to go to our councils and things like that to get it reversed? I live in the North Texas Municipal Water District, and there's 13 member cities, but I live in a customer city. So on their website it says you can ask us to remove fluoride, but you have to live in Allen, Farmersville, Forney, Frisco, Garland, McKinney, Mesquite, Plano, Princeton, Richmond, Rockwall, Royce City, or Wiley. I don't live in any of those cities. And so, at some point, a couple years ago, I was trying to say, hey, if you live in this city, can we write to them and say, get the fluoride out? And it didn't go anywhere. But I don't even live in that member city. So, and that's 1.7 million North Texans. My son even did a PSA back in 2nd grade. So, about, it's on YouTube, like, you need to filter your water, just in general. Filter it all. Do not give it to your pets. Do not drink tap water. You are being affected. And it's not just the fluoride, it's other things as well. So how many times is it going to take, or how many letters, or how do we do this, especially when these cities, this one is corrupt. Oh, it's so corrupt.
So it's really, there's no one-size-fits-all approach, right? Every community is you're gonna find, there's a creativity component, how citizens can work together to raise awareness and then to affect change in their community. And it's going to be a lot of outreach, a lot of networking. It's not easy, but and I have to say, I'm not the best person to ask on that. It's not my forte. Okay, I recognize it's not one of my strengths how to do that because it is challenging. But people have done it. Many communities across the country have done it, and it feels really good when you do it, right? When you're in that town council. And then the vote comes down 4-1 to end this policy. This happened in my town in Canton, New York in the 1990s. It feels really good because that chemical is now removed from the water, right? So I wish I had a better answer for you. I would say one thing about the lawsuit that we've been working on for the past 8 years, okay? If we win, the court will make a finding that water fluoridation presents an unreasonable risk to human health. And what that triggers is the EPA becomes statutorily bound, mandated under law to eliminate the risk. EPA has to initiate rulemaking proceedings where they will announce how are we going to eliminate the risk posed by adding fluoride chemicals to drinking water. So let me think about this. Risk from adding chemicals to drinking water. How might we eliminate that risk?
Yes, ma'am.
You got a question over there.
I'll repeat it so you don't have to get your exercise in there. Okay, yes, go ahead.
It's my understanding the first time that fluoride was added to drinking water was in Nazi Germany to make the Jews more docile and easily controlled. And then it was added here in 1944, I believe, according to the film, if I got that right. And it mentioned that Harold Hodges was chairman of the Nuremberg Committee. Can you connect on that?
So this is a common...
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sorry. This is about what the Nazis used fluoride in the water to facilitate the concentration camps and the extermination of the Jews, and then we picked it up after that. And that somebody, who was it? That Harold Hodges was on Nuremberg trials involved.
So I'm an attorney, and I'm someone who's driven by documents. I need it in a document, okay? Until it's in a document, I can't do anything with it, okay? When I've been researching and investigating the fluoride issue since 2000, so about 24 years. Didn't expect that. But I heard that claim, and I was interested in that. I wanted to understand it, right? And I did everything I could
to find documents that would support that the Nazis used fluoride in drinking water. Okay, because I know a lot of people believe it, and people say it. Okay, and based on I did not find any reliable documentation for that. Okay, none. The basis of that claim is some 1 or 2 members, people coming back from Europe, who said it to other people in the United States when they came back from Europe. But that in law is what we would call hearsay. And I can't rely on that. So I personally do not find it credible, okay? But I welcome anybody to do that kind of shoe leather investigation. If someone presented me the document that proved it up, I'm all open to hearing it. Based on my investigation, I am not able to, I did not find that to be true. Harold Hodge was not part of the Nuremberg committee that I'm aware of, okay? But Harold Hodge, interestingly, did have some connections with the CIA. Make of that what you will.
Go ahead, the man in red there, so you can, at the top. Yeah.
Great film. Thanks for putting it together. I'm going to drop something here because there's probably some folks in the audience that will receive it and know what to do with it. Others will not have a clue. I worked with a gentleman who was with the Navy for 25 years. He was on a particular type of medication. This is not a fluoride drop, but it's germane to what the gentleman in Aqua asked 5 minutes ago. Why is the government doing what they do? He retired from the Navy. Before he did, he had to pick up a prescription he'd been on for many years at the Italian pharmacist. When he went in and picked up the prescription, the pill was literally physically half the size. And when he said, "I need the full prescription," the pharmacist assured him, "You got the full prescription. In the European Union, it's not legal for us to add the side effect chemistries." Okay? I think the gentleman in Aqua was on point. This is part of a larger scheme to reduce the population.
Yeah, amen.
You can list 4 or 5 things that have happened recently. Shot, fluoride. I've got a screen print from a doctor who apparently was associated with some cancer outfit that said nothing causes cancer more quickly or effectively than fluoride. And that might be why you're drinking it. Final question. This is actually a question to Mr. Huffines. Mr. Huffines, you said a minute ago that Highland Park doesn't have the water. As the young lady indicated here a minute ago, she listed 8 or 10 cities. Most of us are getting water from the same place. How's Highland Park getting it out?
That's a very good question. Highland Park has an owed water contract. So they adjudicated water rights when Lake Grapevine was constructed in the 30s. It's a very old town. So they pipe their water in directly from Lake Grapevine and treat it themselves. So they don't buy water from Dallas, and they don't buy it from North Texas or Upper Trinity. Upper Trinity is Denton County, North Texas is more Collin County, and then Dallas provides a lot of water for the Dallas County region. So there's difference. Arlington would be different. The Trinity River Authority is a little bit different. So.
And then they don't add it.
They don't add it, yeah. It's all added, generally. There might be some natural fluoride in there, but I'm sure Michael could answer, but it's all an additive. They bring in dump trucks of this stuff. Dump trucks. And look, for me, if somebody wants to put it on their bread and their cereal in the morning, get after it. That's just fine. But don't force it down the throats of every citizen in this country or this state. This is crazy.
You got a question over here?
Here.
Hi, I would just like to note that Highland Park is where all the doctors and the dentists and the attorneys live. So, and I'm not picking on them, I'm just asking, were they able to vote no fluoride? And if they did vote, is it because they know what it's doing to people's...
I can't answer that question. I do not know. As far as my history wouldn't go back that far. I don't know why they didn't add it. Maybe they were just cheap and didn't want to spend the money. Would have been luck. Oh, Regina knows. Regina.
I've talked to them. Okay.
Okay, Regina knows.
Want me to do this? Yeah. Okay, they still get the same source water. They decided a long time ago not to add the fluoride to the water. And to this day, they still haven't. So it's the fact that they don't. They chose not to, and they do their own water. So there you go. There you go.
They were more. We'll be up here.
Hi. Sorry, I was told to talk like 5 minutes ago. I'm sorry. I have a question for you. Be super brief. Based on the fact that Rachel, head of HHS, is trying to temper the release of the report, how do you move the case along? What's going to happen now with the case?
So, good question. When I found out that the report had been blocked, right, we immediately went into discovery mode in the case, okay? And we got a copy of the report, and that was really because we had a trial earlier this year. Really, the focus of the trial was that report. So that has kind of made it harder for the NTP now to just not do anything, right? So I can report that the NTP is in the process of moving forward with this. They're not, officially they still intend to publish it, but it's what?
75 years?
Well, it's over 2 years since they were done with it. They still haven't released it. So I can't say they will publish it, but I understand that there is an intention for them to release this. And when they release it, that's a very significant and historic moment, because I think it's fair to say that when the United States began fluoridating its water in 1945, that wasn't part of the benefit of the bargain that this chemical reduces IQ. Do you think we would have added this to the water if we knew this is a chemical that lowers IQ?
But can we push the court to push them forward?
Well, the court, I can say that the court, we actually, the whole litigation has served as a leverage point on the NTP to push them forward. So the lawsuit has had a beneficial effect, because the judge would make these comments and he's here what's happening with the NTP report, what's going on. There was so the court case was a pressure point, because the NTP knew they were being overseen by the judge, right? So I think it was the overall, but now the case is effectively complete. So so we're now waiting on the judge's decision. Okay, we're waiting on the judge's decision. But I do think that the NTP process was that the court case helped put pressure on the NTP in a beneficial way.
How can you be sure the report has not been altered?
Well, we will find out.
Could you repeat the question?
How can you be sure? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, we know. Okay, the question was if the NTP report is ultimately published, which is an if, how will we know the report has not been altered? Well, we will know because we were able to force the NTP to give us copies of the May 2022 documents, so we have that. By the way, I love that there's so many questions. This is great.
Well, okay, yes, ma'am.
What are the prospects for a class action lawsuit for damages? I have hypothyroidism. My father had it. I have bone on both knees.
So, good question, and I'm an attorney, so I need to put my restraints on to not get super legally wonky, okay? Because it could become really boring, okay? But class action lawsuits have certain rules to them that make it tricky to have a class action for health effects. And so you're really more limited to personal injury actions on an individual basis. And so I would say that there's legal rules that make the cases challenging, but that's not to say that they won't and can't happen.
Let's go back upstairs there. Okay, right there, yes.
Okay, and there is one so-called positive effect, and that is the whitening of teeth. However,
if fluoride embrittalizes the bones, it embrittalizes the teeth as well. Not only that, in the fluid that they inject or put into the mouth, it is probably far more densely concentrated fluoride than any water that we would ever drink, and a good portion of that undoubtedly is being absorbed in the flesh in the mouth and going into our system. There is no good reason for fluoride at all. This whitening of the teeth is BS.
So, and fluoride ingestion does cause this condition called dental fluorosis, which causes this white splotching and staining of the teeth. And the thing, I'll give a little side story here on this, okay? And fluoride was a massive liability to the largest industries in this country in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. In those 4 decades, there was no chemical in this country that caused more litigation and damage claims against the largest industries in this country than fluoride. Talking about Alcoa, Reynolds, U.S. Steel, fertilizer companies, and the bomb program. And why do I raise that? Because fluoride had one major disadvantage to large industry. When you release it into the air, and you have cows nearby, the cows eat the grass. And they get too much fluoride in their system, and guess what happens? Their teeth show fluorosis, which is a staining of the teeth, and then the teeth fall out. The cow's teeth would fall out, and the cows would become crippled, and they would walk on their elbows, okay? And why is that? The reason why that was so problematic for industry is it is a fingerprint. Yeah. It is a fingerprint. There's only one thing that's going to cause cows to walk on their elbows and have their teeth fall out. It's fluoride. Right. So you had communities across this country suing these industries saying, hey, stop poisoning our cattle, and by the way, our vegetation as well, and our health. So fluoride was a nightmare for the largest industries. I want to emphasize that. Largest, most politically powerful industries in this country, okay? And that what we don't, and I didn't talk about that in this film, but that's a significant fact because it was those industries that for decades funded study after study after study after study that gave fluoride a clean bill of health, a clean bill of health, a clean bill of health. So how did we get here? Why do we have 70% of Americans drinking fluoridated water? Because we have a science, this body of science that was corrupted by corporations and government that both had the same problem. Because the U.S. bomb program plants were poisoning the communities, the downwind communities, the downstream communities, right? And these aluminum plants and steel plants and fertilizer plants were also poisoning the downwind communities. And so you had government scientists and industry scientists literally working together to fund the science on fluoride that now informs what the public health community understands about fluoride.
Also, I'd like to say that all the C-suites from almost all the media, print, air, TV, radio, they're controlled by the government too, almost 100%, and they have been for years. That's why you don't get investigative reporters. You got a lot of good investigative reporters out there that go do the story, take it upstairs, never gets printed, never going to be heard from again. And so the government, when our media comes out with the exact same stories all the time, including Fox News, including CBS, NBC, and everything else. So don't think that this isn't premeditated on covering up this stuff. Because it is by the media. Otherwise, we would have known something about it. Somebody would have questioned the fact that they're poisoning us.
Can I ask, do we have a reporter here? If we do, can you stand up and we give him a big applause?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, carry on. Any other questions up there
Got a
about the
question over
report?
there on that
Where do you
side.
want to take one? Okay, over there.
Hi, this is for Serena. This is my concise question. Who's getting paid? Who owns the fluoride and who's selling it to whoever?
It's the $1 million question, or probably a lot more than that. But it's so my question, my answer to this is
not that straightforward, okay? And I should say a couple things. One is, I just talked about the industries, right? These big industries. I always think about the politics, and I have to bifurcate. I have to say, I understand the politics of fluoride very well in the beginning, in 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. I know the politics there because I have documents, okay? I'm an attorney. I like the documents. I have them for that period. I have a lot, okay? And industry was very involved, okay? But today is a little different because you don't have the Alcoas and the Reynolds and these big industries with the same fluoride pollution problems. They largely dealt with them, okay, after they being sued the millionth time, okay? So their interest, I don't see them having as much involvement as they did back in the day. So who might be involved, okay? And it's not an easy, I don't have the documents to really tell me the answers on that. So I'm left more in a position of reasonable speculation, if you will, okay? So I'll just offer a few things, and this is really something where I encourage, I haven't gotten there, but that doesn't mean someone else can. I hope someone does the more, shoe leather investigation to figure that out. But I think there's a few important components to the politics today. One is the basic notion that these agencies like the CDC that have been promoting it so absolutely for so long that it's hard for them to change course, right? If you've told the public this is absolutely safe, won't harm anybody, not a single person will ever be harmed by this. That's the position they've had for 70 years. So how do you turn around and change that, right? So there's that component that it should not be lost in this, right? But then who else might be? And I would offer one industry that has been lurking in the shadows of the fluoride issue for the full, certainly in the old days, and I suspect they're still interested, and that is the sugar industry, okay? If your industry creates cavities in the teeth, and you don't want the government to take away your product, right? Well, it sure is nice to have some industrial pixie dust that you can sprinkle in the water and act like you're dealing with the problem, right? Don't look at us. Oh, look at this wonderful fluoride in the water. Oh, look, it's all taken care of, right? So you have that component, and we have documents showing that the sugar industry was intimately involved with fluoride research for the first few decades at least, okay? So there's that factor. And then you have, I think, the dental trade associations, the American Dental Association. Don't get me started on the ADA. The ADA is so aggressive in literally forcing fluoride down our throats, okay? But they say, oh, look at us dentists. We're putting ourselves out of business by preventing cavities, by adding the pixie dust in the water, okay? Well, no dentists are going out of business that I can see from treating teeth, okay? But it overlooks, dentists, the American Dental Association fights tooth and nail. No pun intended. No pun intended. They fight tooth and nail, state after state, year after year, to prevent any ability to have low-cost dental providers come into communities to treat people in need. People whose only option for dental care is to go to the emergency room because they have a tooth decay that's abscessing and they have an infection that's serious because they can't afford dentists, okay? But the Dental Association fights against the ability to have low-cost dental providers to provide care. And so, because it's a monopoly, it's a whole monopoly. And so, put pixie dust in the water, and that looks like you're dealing with the problem, right? Don't deal with our monopoly. Put some chemical in the water. I think that's a factor that needs to be reckoned with. That does go back to the very beginning. But I should add the qualifier here. I'm an attorney. I like my documents, right? I don't have current documents, right, on this. So I can't speak with any authority on the political interests behind why they're so emphatic in promoting this.
Because I do wonder. I've been studying this for 24 years. Okay, I wish I had a better answer. I wish I did. But I wonder, I think to myself, wait a second. The stuff doesn't need to be swallowed. Okay. Adding it to water which we drink. It's now a neurotoxicant that lowers IQ. It causes likely thyroid disease. Why are we doing this to ourselves anymore? Why are we still adding it to water when you don't need to swallow it, right? So it's like a legitimate question that I'm scratching my head over, right? Like, why are we still doing it?
Got a question over here.
3 items. What filters, water filters, can we buy that effectively take fluoride out so we can take care of ourselves? Number 1. Number 2, because we're in World War III, other countries are adding to their nuclear warhead arsenal. I've seen an entry on the Department of Energy website talking that there are more plutonium pits now being added to the nuclear stockpile of the U.S. I don't know if fluoride is used in plutonium production, but just like it was with uranium, but you might look at that to see if there is fluoride being produced or put in the water because of that. That was number 2. Number 3, a little good news. It's on a subject not on fluoride but tangential. It's on gain of function research, the Texas GOP platform. We were able to add information, gain of function accountability 2 years ago. Beth Biesel, who's done so many good things, has added that 2 years ago. And then I and others helped to add to that. We urge the legislature to authorize the Attorney General and appropriate law enforcement agencies to investigate and prosecute for treason and murder any and all participants who knowingly release biological weapons or vaccines that cause harm. So that was some good news that everyone needs to hear.
So let me address your first question, which is the filters, and I can give very clear guidance on this. Your pure filter, your Brita filter, they use activated carbon, okay? They do not remove fluoride, okay? One of the problems with adding fluoride to the water is you need more advanced filtration systems to remove it. So pure and Brita do not remove fluoride, okay? To remove fluoride, you need to use reverse osmosis systems or activated alumina systems, or distillation will remove it. So you have distillation units will remove it completely. Distillation will remove everything, okay? Even the good stuff though, so you've got to keep that in mind. And then there are some ion exchange systems that can remove it. But if you're looking for like a sink-based filtration system, reverse osmosis and activated alumina, you would need one of those 2 for it to remove it, okay? Otherwise, go for a distillation unit, which you can get like countertop distillation units.
I think we're going to have a last question here, and then everyone else, if you still have questions, you can buy Mike a drink over at the Londoner and talk to him.
It's going to be a late night.
Here's our last question, and then we'll see who had the best question.
Thank you so much for all that you've done. It's appreciated greatly. Have there been any other studies on fluoride and the effects on people other than the one we were talking about tonight?
So I'm glad you asked this because I wanted to just mention this. So one of the things that this film talks about that we didn't get into in any detail is this notion of human experiments, okay? Because in the 1990s, as I mentioned in the film, it came to light that the government had done these radiation experiments on people. Patients get in a car crash, go to the hospital, injected with plutonium, followed for the rest of their life unknowingly. They didn't know they were being monitored by scientists to understand if their health was adversely affected by the plutonium or the uranium. Okay, that is now known, it's undisputed. But what has never been discussed and never really been the subject of investigation is, were they doing a similar type of thing with fluoride? Because fluoride, as we talked about, was a process chemical for the bomb program. scientists were keenly interested to understand how fluoride was affecting the workers' health and the community's health, just like they wanted to understand plutonium and uranium. So logically, there's no reason why they wouldn't have done these studies on fluoride. And I have, in fact, in my documents, come across examples and things that strongly suggest that there was human experimentation going on fluoride, okay? That was never publicly disclosed. And I think it's a subject of that really needs to be better understood. What were they doing? What did they learn? And I'll give you a couple of examples, okay? A couple of examples of what I have seen. Harold Hodge, who talked about, there I have a transcript where he's talking with other scientists about fluoride. And one of the guys is a doctor at the baby hospital in New York City. And the doctor said that he was giving a baby 10 milligrams of fluoride a day, which is a cruel level of fluoride to give a baby. It's extremely high. And the doctor said that he was observing skeletal fluorosis develop in the baby's bones. Skeletal fluorosis is can be a crippling disorder, right? So the doctor was observing skeletal fluorosis in this baby, okay? Harold Hodge's response upon learning of this information wasn't, why are you poisoning this kid? What's going on? That's wrong. Harold Hodge was, that's extremely interesting. Have you considered doing basal metabolism test on the baby? Because basal metabolism would be to understand the thyroid effects. Harold Hodge was like, oh, this is a great opportunity to study the thyroid effects. So that's one study, okay, never published. Another is, in Massachusetts, you had these schools of orphans, okay? And that was the thing back then. And orphans were actually the subject of a lot of biomedical testing. There's a book called Against Their Will, which is all about how we tested on orphans all these drugs, okay? And sure enough, in the 1950s, there was this one school official, Florence something, I forget her last name, and she found out that this one school of orphans was fluoridating its water secretly, not publicly disclosed. And it was part of an experiment where they were comparing against another school that was not fluoridating its water, never publicly disclosed. So why were they doing that? What was this study? And actually that school was a school of developmentally disabled kids. They were actually mentally, they had intellectual disabilities. So why were they studying the effects of fluoridated water on children who had intellectual disabilities? Why didn't they disclose that to the public? Why is there no studies published on that? Right? And I'll give you one more example of a human experiment. Cancer patients. 1940s, New York City. An army doctor just came back from the war, was leading a study where he was injecting these patients with up to 10 milligrams per kilogram per day of fluoride, which is an extremely dangerous level of fluoride. It's the level of fluoride that will easily kill people, not in dispute. It was purportedly to understand whether this would be like a chemotherapy type drug, okay? But it's the kind of study that smacks of another, like, government involvement, okay? And one of the girls who got it, oh, guess what? She died. Surprise, right? She died within a couple of months of receiving this treatment. But the author assures us that it was not because of the fluoride dosing. But, I think that there is, a real need to understand what they did. What did they do? Why did they do it? What did they find? And why did they not share it with the public? So that's for another day.
Oh, let's give it up for Michael right here. A true expert who's devoted 24 years to set you free. Also, I'd like to recognize Regina right here, Regina Inversno. She has worked so hard on this issue. Thank you, Regina. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thank you, Michael, for coming to Texas, coming to Dallas, and thank you for all that you've done.
Okay,
you have a closing remark real quick.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. I really enjoyed this, and for those who can stay and come to the Londoner, I'm happy to answer questions that weren't asked and answered today. Thank you.
You know, we have a second screening over at the Londoner. It's a short 20-minute musical called Plandemic, the musical, and it's really fun and uplifting. It was really, really hard to pick a winner tonight. Your questions are really good, to the point. We feel like we should have asked what at the water ban, but I think we're going to go with your right. You had just a couple of words. Where's the money come? Congratulations. You win 2 tickets to the Faith and Freedom fundraiser. Charlie Kurt, Laura Logan, Michael Flynn, August 2nd. You'll be at a table with all really good conversationalists because they all ask great questions. We're at the patio on the Londoner. We'll have a little buffet going. It's the buffet with a little donation hat at the end of it. Easy to pick out. Okay, thanks so much, Michael and Don.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.